Hello, lovely people. So I'm reading from Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception. We're on Chapter 3, Part 2. The Second Heaven. At last the man, the ego, the threefold spirit, enters the second heaven. He is clad in the sheath of mind, which contains the three seed atoms, the quintessence of the three discarded vehicles. When the man dies and loses his dense and vital bodies, there is the same condition as when one falls asleep. The desire body, as has been explained, has no organs ready for use. It's now transformed from an ovoid to a figure resembling the dense body, which has been abandoned. We can easily understand that there must be an interval of unconsciousness resembling sleep, and then the man awakes in the desire world. It not infrequently happens, however, that such people are for a long time unaware of what has happened to them. They do not realize that they have died. They know that they are able to move and think. It's sometimes even a very hard matter to get them to believe that they are really dead. They realize that something is different, but they are not able to understand what it is. Not so, however, when the change is made from the first heaven, which is in the desire world, to the second heaven, which is in the region of concrete thought. Then the man leaves his desire body. He is perfectly conscious. He passes into a great stillness. For the time being, everything seems to fade away. He cannot think. No faculty is alive, yet he knows that he is. He has a feeling of standing in the great forever, of standing utterly alone, yet unafraid, and his soul is filled with a wonderful peace, which passeth all understanding. In occult science, this is called the Great Silence. Then comes the awakening. The spirit is now in its home world, heaven. Here, the first awakening brings to the spirit the sound of the music of the spheres. In our earth life, we are so immersed in the little noises and sounds of our limited environment that we are incapable of hearing the music of the marching orbs, but the occult scientist hears it. He knows that the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 7 planets form the sounding board and strings of Apollo's 7-stringed lyre. He knows that there a single discord to mar the celestial harmony from that grand instrument, there would be a wreck of matter and a crash of worlds. The power of rhythmic vibration is well known to all who have given the subject even the least study. For instance, soldiers are commanded to break step when crossing a bridge, otherwise their rhythmic tramp would shatter the strongest structure. The Bible story of the sounding of the ram's horn while marching around the walls of the city of Jericho is not nonsensical. In some cases, similar things have happened without the world smiling in supercilious incredulity. A few years ago, a band of musicians were practicing in a garden close to the very solid wall of an old castle. There occurred at a certain place in the music a prolonged and piercing tone. When this note was sounded, the wall of the castle suddenly fell. The musicians had struck the keynote of the wall, and it was sufficiently prolonged to shatter it. When it's said that this is the world of tone, it must not be thought that there are no colours. Many people know that there is an intimate connection between colour and tone. So when a certain note is struck, a certain colour appears simultaneously. So it is also in the heaven world. Colour and sound are both present, but the tone is the originator of the colour. Hence it's said that this is particularly the world of tone, and it's this tone that builds all forms in the physical world. The musician can hear certain tones in different parts of nature, such as the wind in the forest, the breaking of the surf on the beach, the roar of the ocean, and the sounding of many waters. These combined tones make a whole, which is a keynote of the earth, its tone. As geometrical figures are created by drawing a violin bow over the edge of a glass plate containing sand, so the forms we see around us are the crystallized sound figures of the archetypal forces which play into the archetypes in the heaven world. The work done by man in the heaven world is many-sided. It's not in the least an inactive, dreamy, not illusory existence. It is a time of the greatest and most important activity in preparing for the next life, as sleep is an active preparation for the work of the following day. Here the quintessence of the three bodies is built into the threefold spirit. As much of the desire body as the man had worked upon during life by purifying his desires and emotions will be welded into the human spirit, thus giving an improved mind in the future. As much of the vital body as the life spirit had worked upon, transformed, spiritualized, and thus saved from the decay to which the rest of the vital body is subject, will be amalgamated with the life spirit to ensure a better vital body and temperament in the succeeding lives. As much of the dense body as the divine spirit has saved by right action will be worked into it and will bring better environment and opportunities. The spiritualization of the vehicle is accomplished by cultivation of the faculties of observation, discrimination, and memory, devotion to high ideals, prayer, concentration, persistence, and right use of the life forces. The second heaven is the real home of man, the ego, the thinker. Here he dwells for centuries, assimilating the fruit of the last earth life and preparing the earthly conditions which will be best suited for his next step in progress. The sound or tone which pervades this region and is everywhere apparent as colour is his instrument, so to speak. It is this harmonious sound vibration which, as an elixir of life, builds into the threefold spirit the quintessence of the threefold body, upon which it depends for growth. The life in the second heaven is an exceedingly active one, varied in many different ways. The ego assimilates the fruits of the last earth life and prepares the environment for a new physical existence. It's not enough to say that the new conditions will be determined by conduct and action in the life just closed. It's required that the fruits of the past be worked into the world, which is to be the next scene of activity, while the ego is gaining fresh physical experiences and gathering further fruit. Therefore, all the denizens of the heaven world work upon the models of the earth, all of which are in the region of concrete thought. They alter the physical features of the earth and bring about the gradual changes which vary its appearance, so that on each return to physical life a different environment has been prepared, wherein new experiences may be gained. Climate, flora and fauna are altered by man under the direction of higher beings. Thus the world is just what we ourselves, individually and collectively, have made it, and it will be what we make it. The occult scientist sees in everything that happens a cause of a spiritual nature manifesting itself, not omitting the prevalence and alarming increasing frequency of seismic disturbances, which it traces to the materialistic thought of modern science. It's true that purely physical causes can bring about such disturbances, but is that the last word on the subject? Can we always get the full explanation by merely recording what happens on the surface? Surely not. We see two men conversing on the street, and one suddenly strikes the other. Another may scoff at this I'll read that again. We see two men conversing on the street, and one suddenly strikes the other, knocking him down. One observer may say that an angry arm lifted, the muscles contract, the arm shot out and came into contact with the victim who was knocked down. This is true, but it's safe to say that had there not first been the angry thought, the blow would not have been struck. In like manner, the occultist says that if materialism had not been, seismic disturbances would not have occurred. Man's work in the heaven world is not confined solely to the alternation of the surface of the earth, which is to be the scene of his future struggles in the subjugation of the physical world. He is also actively engaged in learning how to build a body which shall afford a better means of expression. It's man's destiny to become a creative intelligence, and he is serving his apprenticeship all the time. During his heaven life, he is learning to build all kinds of bodies, the human included. We've spoken of the forces which work along the positive and negative poles of the different ethers. Man himself is part of that force. Those whom we call dead are the ones who help us to live. They in turn are helped by the so-called nature spirits, which they command. Man is directed in this work by teachers from the higher creative hierarchies, which helped him to build his vehicles before he attained self-consciousness, in the same way he himself now builds his bodies in sleep. During heaven life, they teach him consciously. The painter is taught to build an accurate eye, capable of taking in a perfect perspective, and of distinguishing colours and shades to a degree inconceivable among those not interested in colour and light. The mathematician has to deal with space, and the faculty for space perception is connected with the delicate instrument of the three semicircular canals which are situated inside the ear, each pointing in one of the three dimensions in space. Logical thought and mathematical ability are in proportion to the accuracy of the adjustment of these semicircular canals. Musical ability is also dependent upon the same factor, but in addition to the necessity for the proper adjustment of the semicircular canals, the musician requires extreme delicacy of the fibres of corti, of which there are about 10,000 in the human ear, each capable of interpreting about 25 gradations of tone. In the ears of the majority of people, they don't respond to more than 3 to 10 of the possible gradations. Among ordinary musical people, the greatest degree of efficiency is about 15 sounds to each fibre, but the master musician, who is able to interpret and bring down music from the heaven world, requires a greater range to be able to distinguish the different notes and detect the slightest discord in the most complicated chords. Persons who require organs of such exceeding delicacy for the expression of their faculties are specially taken care of, as the higher state of their development merits and demands. None other ranks so high as the musician, which is reasonable when we consider that while the painter draws his inspiration chiefly from the world of colour, the nearer desire world, the musician attempts to bring us the atmosphere of the heavenly home, where as spirits we are citizens, and to translate them into the sounds of earth life. His is the highest mission, because as a mode of expression for soul life, music reigns supreme. That music is different from and higher than all the other arts. I'll read that again. That music is different from and higher than all the other arts can be understood when we reflect that a statue or painting, when once created, is permanent. They are drawn from the desire world and are therefore more easily crystallized, while music, being of the heaven world, is more elusive and must be recreated each time we hear it. It cannot be imprisoned, as shown by their successful attempts to do so partially by means of such mechanical devices as phonographs and piano players. The music so reproduced loses much of the soul-stirring sweetness it possesses when it comes fresh from its own world, carrying to the soul memories of its home and speaking to it in a language that no beauty expressed in marble or upon canvas can equal. The instrument through which man senses music is the most perfect sense organ in the human body. The eye is not by any means true, but the ear is, in the sense that it hears every sound without distortion, while the eye often distorts what it sees. In addition to the musical ear, the musician must also learn to build a long, fine hand with slender fingers and sensitive nerves, otherwise he would not be able to reproduce the melodies he hears. It's a law of nature that no one can inhabit a more efficient body than he is capable of building. He first learns to build a certain grade of body, and afterwards he learns to live in it. In that way he discovers its defects and is taught how to remedy them. All men work unconsciously at the building of their bodies during antenatal life until they've reached a point where the quintessence of former bodies, which they have saved, is to be built in. Then they work consciously. It will therefore be seen that the more a man advances and the more he works on his vehicles, thus making them immortal, the more power he has to build a new life. The advanced pupil of an occult school sometimes commences to build for himself as soon as the work during the first 3 weeks, which belongs exclusively to the mother, has been completed. When the period of unconscious building has passed, the man has a chance to exercise his nascent creative power, and the true original creative process, epigenesis, begins. Thus we see that man learns to build his vehicles in the heaven world and to use them in the physical world. Nature provides all phases of experience in such a marvellous manner and with such consummate wisdom that as we learn to see deeper and deeper into her secrets, we are more and more impressed with our own insignificance and with an ever-growing reverence for God, whose visible symbol nature is. The more we learn of her wonders, the more we realize that this world system is not the vast perpetual motion machine unthinking people would have us believe. It will be quite as logical to think that if we toss a box of loose type into the air, the characters will have arranged themselves into the words of a beautiful poem by the time they reach the ground. The greater the complexity of the plan, the greater the argumental weight in favour of the theory of an intelligent divine author. The third heaven. Having assimilated all the fruits of his last life and altered the appearance of the earth in such a manner as to afford him the necessary environment for his next step towards perfection, having also learned by work on the bodies of others to build a suitable body through which to express himself in the physical world, and having at last resolved the mind into the essence which builds the threefold spirit, the naked individual spirit ascends into the higher region of the world of thought, the third heaven. Here, by the ineffable harmony of this higher world, it is strengthened for its next dip into matter. After a time comes the desire for new experience and the contemplation of a new birth. This conjures up a series of pictures before the vision of the spirit, a panorama of the new life in store for it. But mark this well. This panorama contains only principal events. The spirit has free will as to the detail. It is as if a man going to a distant city had a time limit ticket with an initial choice of route. After he has chosen and begun his journey, it's not sure that he can change to another route during the trip. He may stop over in as many places as he wishes within his time limit, but he cannot go back. Thus, as he proceeds on his journey, he becomes more and more limited by his past choice. If he had chosen a steam road using soft coal, he must expect to be soiled and dusty. Had he chosen a road burning anthracite or using electricity, he would have been cleaner. So it is with the man in a new life. He may have to live a hard life, but he is free to choose whether he will live it cleanly or wallow in the mire. Other conditions are also within his control, subject to the limits of his past choices and acts. The pictures in the panorama of the coming life of which we have just spoken begin at the cradle and end at the grave. This is the opposite direction to that in which they travel in the after-death panorama, already explained, which passes through the vision of the spirit immediately following its release from the dense body. The reason for this radical difference in the two panoramas is that in the before-birth panorama, the object is to show the returning ego how certain causes or acts always produce certain effects. In the case of the after-death panorama, the object is the reverse, i.e., to show how each event in the past life was the effect of some cause further back in the life. Nature, or God, does nothing without a logical reason, and the further we search, the more apparent it becomes to us that nature is a wise mother, always using the best means to accomplish her ends. But it may be asked, why should we be reborn? Why must we return to this limited and miserable earth existence? Why can we not get experience in those higher realms without coming to earth? We are tired of this dreary, weary earth life. Such queries are based upon misunderstandings of several kinds. In the first place, let us realize and engrave it deep upon the tablets of our memory that the purpose of life is not happiness but experience. Sorrow and pain are our most benevolent teachers, while the joys of life are but fleeting. This seems a stern doctrine, and the heart cries out passionately at even the thought that it may possibly be true. Nevertheless, it is true, and upon examination it will be found not such a stern doctrine after all. Consider the blessings of pain. If we could place our hand upon a hot stove and feel no pain, the hand might be allowed to remain until it, and perhaps the arm, were burned away without our knowing anything about it until too late to save them. It's the pain resulting from the contact with the hot stove which makes us snatch our hand away before serious damage is done. Instead of losing the hand, we escape with a blister which quickly heals. This is an illustration from the physical world. We find that same principle applies in the moral and mental worlds. If we outrage morality, the pangs of conscience brings us pain that will prevent us from repeating the act, and if we do not heed the first lesson, nature will give us a harder and harder experience until at last the fact is forced into our consciousness that the way of the transgressor is hard. This will continue until at last we are forced to turn in a new direction and take a step onward towards a better life. Experience is knowledge of the effects which follow acts. This is the object of life, together with the development of will, which is the force whereby we apply the results of experience. Experience must be gained, but we have the choice whether we gain it by the hard path of personal experience or by observation of other people's acts, reasoning and reflecting thereon, guided by the light of whatever experience we've already had. This is the method by which the occult student should learn, instead of requiring the lash of adversity and pain. The more willing we are to learn in that way, the less we shall feel the stinging thorns of the path of pain, and the more quickly shall we gain the path of peace. The choice is ours, but so long as we have not learned all there is to learn in this world, we must come back to it. We cannot stay in the higher worlds and learn there until we have mastered the lessons of earth life. That would be as sensible as to send a child to kindergarten one day and to college the next. The child must return to the kindergarten day after day and spend years in the grammar school and the high school before its study has developed its capacity sufficiently to enable it to understand the lessons taught in college. Man is also in school, the school of experience. He must return many times before he can hope to master all the knowledge in the world of sense. No one earth life, however rich in experience, could furnish the knowledge, so nature decrees that he must return to earth, after intervals of rest, to take up his work where he dropped it, exactly as a child takes up its work in school each day, after the intervening sleep of night. It is not argument against this theory to say that man does not remember his former lives. We cannot recall all the events of our present lives. We do not recollect our labours in learning to write, yet we have acquired a knowledge of the art of writing, which proves that we did learn. All the faculties we possess are a proof that we acquired them sometime, somewhere. Some people do remember their past, however, as a remarkable instance related at the end of the next chapter will show, and is but one among many. Again, if there were no return to earth, what is the use of living? Why strive for anything? Why should a life of happiness in an eternal heaven be the reward for a good life? What benefit could come from a good life in heaven where everybody is already happy? Surely in a place where everybody is happy and contented, there is no need for sympathy, self-sacrifice, or wise counsel. No one would need them here. But on earth there are many who need these very things, and such humanitarian and altruistic qualities are of the greatest service to struggling humanity. Therefore, the great law, which works for good, brings man back to work again in the world for the benefit to himself and others, with his acquired treasures, instead of letting them go to waste in a heaven where no one needs them. Preparations for rebirth. Having thus seen the necessity for repeated embodiments, we will next consider the method by which this purpose is accomplished. Previous to taking dip into matter, the threefold spirit is naked, having only the forces of the 4 seed atoms, which are the nuclei of the threefold body and the sheath of mind. Its descent resembles the putting on of several pairs of gloves of increasing thickness, as previously illustrated. The forces of the mind of the last life are awakened from their latency in the seed atom. This begins to attract to itself materials from the highest subdivision of the region of concrete thought, in a manner similar to that in which a magnet draws to itself iron filings. If we hold a magnet over a miscellaneous heap of filings of brass, silver, gold, iron, lead, and other metals, we shall find that it selects only iron filings, and that even of them it will take no more than its strength enables it to lift. Its attractive power is of a certain kind and is limited to a certain quantity of that kind. The same is true of the seed atom. It can take in each region nothing except the material for which it has an affinity, and nothing beyond a certain definite quantity even of that. Thus the vehicle built around this nucleus becomes an exact counterpart of the corresponding vehicle of the last life, minus the evil which has been expurgated, and plus the quintessence of good which has been incorporated in the seed atom. The material selected by the threefold spirit forms itself into a great bell-shaped figure, open at the bottom and with the seed atom at the top. If we conceive of the illustration spiritually, we may compare it to a diving bell descending into a sea composed of fluids of increasing density. These correspond to the different subdivisions of each world. The matter taken into the texture of the bell-shaped body makes it heavier, so that it sinks into the next lower subdivision, and it takes from that its proper quota of matter. Thus it becomes still heavier and sinks yet deeper, until it's passed through the 4 subdivisions of the region of concrete thought, and the sheath of the new mind of the man is complete. Next, the forces in the seed atom of the desire body are awakened. It places itself at the top of the bell, inside, and the materials of the 7th region of the desire world draw around it until it sinks to the 6th region, getting more material there. And this process continues until the 1st region of the desire world is reached. The bell has now 2 layers, the sheath of mind outside and the new desire body inside. The seed atom of the vital body is next aroused into activity, but here the process of information is not so simple as in the case of the mind and the desire body, for it must be remembered that these vehicles were comparatively unorganized, while the vital body and the dense body are more organized and very complicated. The material of a given quantity and quality is attracted in the same manner and under the operation of the same law as in the case of the higher bodies, but the building of the new body and the placement in the proper environment is done by 4 great beings of immeasurable wisdom, which are the recording angels, the lords of destiny. They impress the reflecting ether of the vital body in such a way that the pictures of the coming life are reflected in it. It, the vital body, is built by the inhabitants of the heaven world and the elemental spirits in such a manner as to form a particular type of brain. But mark this: the returning ego itself incorporates therein the quintessence of its former vital bodies, and in addition to this also does a little original work. This is done that in the coming life there may be some room for original and individual expression, not predetermined by past action. It's very important to remember this fact. There is too great a tendency to think that all which now exists is the result of something that previously existed. But if that were the case, there would be no margin left for new and original effort and for new causes. The chain of cause and effect is not a monotonous repetition. There is an influx of new and original causes all the time. That is the real backbone of evolution, the only thing that gives it meaning and makes it other than an unrolling of latent actualities. This is the epigenesis, the free will, that consists of the freedom, the inaugurate something entirely new, not merely a choice between 2 courses of action. This is the important factor which alone can explain the system to which we belong in a satisfactory manner. Involution and evolution in themselves are insufficient, but coupled with epigenesis, we have a full triad of explanation. The fate of an individual generated under the law of consequence is of great complexity and involves association with egos in and out of physical existence at all times, even those living at one time may not be living in the same locality, so that it's impossible for one's individual destiny to be all worked out in one lifetime or in one place. The ego is therefore brought into a certain environment and family with which it's some way related. As regards the fate to be worked out, it's sometimes immaterial into which one of several environments the ego is reborn, and when such is the case, it is allowed its choice as far as possible. But once an ego is so placed, the agents of the laws of destiny watch unseen, that no act of free will shall frustrate the working out of the portion of fate selected. If we do aught of such as to circumvent that part, they will make another move, so as to enforce fulfilment of the destiny. It cannot be too often reiterated, however, that this does not render man helpless. It's merely the same law that governs after we have fired a pistol. We are then unable to stop the bullet or even to deflect it from its course in any way. Its direction was determined by the position in which the pistol was held when we fired. That could have been changed at any time before the trigger was pulled, as up to that time we had full control. The same is true regarding new actions which make future destiny. We may, up to a certain point, modify or even altogether counteract certain causes already set in motion, but once started and no further action taken, they will get beyond our control. This is called ripe fate, and it's this kind that is meant when it said that the lords of destiny check every attempt to shirk it. With regard to our past, we are to a great extent helpless, but in regard to future action, we have full control, except insofar as we are hampered by our past actions. By and by, however, as we learn that we are the cause of our own sorrow or joy, we shall awake to the necessity of ordering our lives more in harmony with the laws of God, and thus rise above these laws of the physical world. That is the key to emancipation, as Goethe says, "From every power that all the world enchains, man frees himself when self-control he gains." The vital body, having been moulded by the laws of destiny, will give form to the dense body organ by organ. This matrix or mould is then placed in the womb of the future mother. The seed atom for the dense body is in the triangular head of one of the spermatozoa in the semen of the father. Spermatozoa, I think, in the semen of the father. This alone makes fertilization possible, and here is the explanation of the fact that so many times sex unions are unfruitful. The chemical constituents of the seminal fluid and the ova are the same at all times, and were these the only requirements, the explanation of the phenomenon of infertility, if sought in the material visible world alone, would not be found. It becomes plain, however, when we understand that as the molecules of water freeze only along the lines of force in the water and manifest as ice crystals, instead of freezing into a homogeneous mass, as would be the case if there were no lines of force previous to coagulation, so there can be no dense body built until there is a vital body in which to build the material. Also, there must be a seed atom for the dense body to act as a gauge of the quality and quantity of the matter which is to be built into that dense body. Although at the present stage of development there is never full harmony in the materials of the body, because that would mean a perfect body, yet the discord must not be so great as to be disruptive of the organism. Thus, while heredity in the first place is true only as regards the material of the dense body and not the soul qualities, which are entirely individual, the incoming ego also does a certain amount of work on its dense body, incorporating in it the quintessence of its past physical qualities. No body is an exact mixture of the qualities of its parents, although the ego is restricted to the use of the materials taken from the bodies of the father and mother. Hence a musician incarnates where he can get the material to build the slender hand and the delicate ear, with its sensitive fibres of corti and its accurate adjustment of the 3 semicircular canals. The arrangement of these materials, however, is to the extent named under the control of the ego. It's as though a carpenter were given a pile of boards to use in building a house in which to live, but is left to his own judgment as to the kind of house he wishes to build. Except in the case of a very high developed being, this work of the ego is almost negligible at the present stage of man's evolution. The greatest scope is given in the building of the desire body, very little in that of the vital body, and almost none in the dense body. Yet even this little is sufficient to make each individual an expression of his own spirit and different from his parents. When the impregnation of the ovum has taken place, the desire body of the mother works upon it for a period of from 18 to 21 days, the ego remaining outside in its desire body and mind sheath, yet always in close touch with the mother. Upon the expiration of that time, the ego enters the mother's body. The bell-shaped vehicles draw themselves down over the head of the vital body, and the bell closes at the bottom. From this time, the ego broods over its coming instrument until the birth of the child and the new earth life of the returning ego commences. Birth of the dense body. The vehicles of the newborn do not at once become active. The dense body is helpless for a long time after birth. Reasoning from analogy, we can readily see that the same must be the case with the higher vehicles. The occult scientist sees it, but even without clairvoyance, reason will show that this must be so. As the dense body is slowly prepared for the separate individual life within the protecting cover of the womb, so the other bodies are gradually born and nurtured into activity, and while the times given in the following description are but approximate, they are nevertheless accurate enough for general purposes, and show the connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the individual and the world. In the period immediately following birth, the different vehicles interpenetrate one another, as in our previous illustration. The sand penetrates the sponge, and the water both sand and sponge. But though they are all present, as in adult life, they are merely present. None of their positive faculties are active. The vital body cannot use the forces which operate along the positive pole of the ethers. Assimilation, which works along the positive pole of the chemical ether, is very dainty during childhood, and what there is of it is due to the macrocosmic vital body, the ethers of which act as a womb for the child's vital body until the 7th year, gradually ripening during that period. The propagative faculty, which works along the positive pole of the life ether, is also latent. The heating of the body, which is carried on along the positive pole of the light ether, and the circulation of the blood are due to the macrocosmic vital body, the ethers acting on the child and slowly developing it to the point where it can control these functions itself. The forces working along the negative pole of the ethers are so much the more active. The excretion of solids carried along the negative pole of the chemical ether, corresponding to the solid subdivision of the chemical region, is too unrestrained, as is also the excretion of fluid, which is carried on along the negative pole of the life ether, corresponding to the second or fluid subdivision of the chemical region. The passive sense perception, which is due to the negative forces of the light ether, is also exceedingly prominent. The child is very impressionable and is all eyes and ears. During the earlier years, the forces operating along the negative pole of the reflecting ether are also extremely active. In those years, children can see the higher worlds, and they often prattle about what they see until the ridicule of their elders or punishment for telling stories teaches them to desist. It's deplorable that the little ones are forced to lie, or at least deny the truth, because of the incredulity of their wise elders. Even the investigations of the Society for Physical Research have proven that children often have invisible playmates, who frequently visit them until they are several years old. During those years, the clairvoyance of the children is of the same negative character as that of the mediums. It's the same with the forces working in the desire body. The passive feeling of physical pain is present, while the feeling of emotion is almost entirely absent. The child will, of course, show emotion on the slightest provocation, but the duration of that emotion is but momentary. It's all on the surface. The child also has the link of mind, but is almost incapable of individual thought activity. It's exceedingly sensitive to forces working along the negative pole, and is therefore imitative and teachable. Thus it is shown that all the negative qualities are active in the newborn entity, but before it's able to use its different vehicles, the positive qualities must be ripened. Each vehicle is therefore brought to a certain degree of maturity by the activity of the corresponding vehicle of the macrocosm, which acts as a womb for it until the degree it is reached. From the 1st to the 7th year, the vital body grows and slowly matures within the womb of the macrocosmic vital body. And because of the greater wisdom of this vehicle of the macrocosm, the child's body is more rounded and well built than in later life. Birth of the vital body. While the macrocosmic vital body guides the growth of the child's body, it's guarded from the dangers which later threaten it when the unwise individual vital body takes unchecked charge. This happens in the 7th year, when the period of excessive dangerous growth begins and continues through the next 7 years. During this time, the macrocosmic desire body performs the function of a womb for the individual desire body. Were the vital body to have continual and unrestrained sway in the human kingdom, as it has in the plant, man would grow to enormous size. There was a time in the far distant past when man was constituted like a plant, having only a dense body and a vital body. The traditions of mythology and folklore all over the world concerning giants in olden times are absolutely true, because then men grew as tall as trees, and for the same reason. The birth of the desire body. The vital body of the plant builds leaf after leaf, carrying the stem higher and higher. Were it not for the macrocosmic desire body, it would keep on in that way indefinitely. But the macrocosmic desire body steps in at a certain point and checks further growth. The force that is needed for further growth is then available for other purposes and is used to build the flower and the seed. In like manner, the human vital body, when the dense body comes under its sway after the 7th year, makes the latter grow very rapidly. But about the 14th year, the individual desire body is born from the womb of the macrocosmic desire body, and is then free to work on its dense body. The excessive growth is then checked, and the force theretofore used for that purpose becomes available for propagation. Then the human plant may flower and bring forth. Therefore, the birth of the personal desire body marks the period of puberty. From this period, the attraction towards the opposite sex is felt, being especially active and unrestrained in the 3rd septenary period of life, from the 14th to the 21st year, because the restraining mind is still then unborn. The birth of the mind. After the 14th year, the mind is in turn brooded over and nurtured by the macrocosmic mind, unfolding its latent possibilities and making it capable of original thought. The forces of the individual's different vehicles have now been ripened to such a degree that he can use them all in his evolution. Therefore, at the 21st year, the ego comes into possession of its complete vehicle. It does this by means of the blood heat and by developing individual blood. This is done in connection with the full development of the light ether. The blood, the vehicle of the ego. In infancy and up to the 14th year, the red marrow bones do not make all the blood corpuscles. Most of them are supplied by the thymus gland, which is the largest in the fetus, and gradually diminishes as the individual blood-making faculty develops in the growing child. The thymus gland contains, as it were, a supply of blood corpuscles given by the parents, and consequently the child, which draws its blood from that source, does not realize its individuality. Not until the blood is made by the child does it think of itself as I. And when the thymus gland disappears at the age of 14, the I feeling reaches its full expression, for then the blood is made and dominated entirely by the ego. The following will make clear the idea and its logic. It will be remembered that assimilation and growth depend upon the forces working along the positive pole of the vital body's chemical ether. That is set free at the 7th year, together with the balance of the vital body. Only the chemical ether is fully ripe at that time. The other parts need more ripening. At the 14th year, the life ether of the vital body, which has to do with propagation, is fully ripe. In the period from 7 to 14 years of age, the excessive assimilation has stored up an amount of force which goes to the sex organs and is ready at the time the desire body is set free. This force of sex is stored in the blood during the third of the 7-year periods, and in that time the light ether, which is the avenue for the blood heat, is developed and controls the heart, so that the body is neither too hot nor too cold. In early childhood, the blood very often rises to an abnormal temperature. During the period of excessive growth, it's frequently the reverse. But in the hot-headed, unrestrained youth, passion and temper very often drive the ego out by overheating the blood. We very appropriately call this an ebullition or boiling over of temper, and describe the effect as causing the person to lose his head, i.e. become incapable of thought. That is exactly what happens when passion, rage or temper overheats the blood, thus drawing the ego outside the bodies. The description is accurate when, of a person in such a state, we say, he has lost control of himself. The ego is outside of his vehicles and they are running amok, bereft of the guiding influence of thought, part of the work of which is to act as a brake on impulse. The great and terrible danger of such outbursts is that before the owner re-enters his body, some disembodied entity may take possession of it and keep him out. This is called obsession. Only the man who keeps cool and does not allow excess of heat to drive him out can think properly. As proof of the assertion that the ego cannot work in the body when the blood is either too hot or too cold, we will call attention to the well-known fact that excessive heat makes one sleepy, and if carried beyond a certain point, it drives the ego out, leaving the body in a faint, that is, unconscious. Excessive cold has also a tendency to make the body sleepy or unconscious. It's only when the blood is at or near the normal temperature that the ego can use it as a vehicle of consciousness. To further show the connection of the ego with the blood, we may mention the burning blush of shame, which is an evidence of the manner in which the blood is driven to the head, thus overheating the brain and paralyzing thought. Fear is the state when the ego wants to barricade himself out against some outside danger. He then drives the blood to the centre and grows pale, because the blood has left the periphery of the body and has lost heat, thus paralysing thought. His blood freezes, he shivers, and his teeth chatter, as when the temperature is lowered by atmospheric conditions. In fever, the excess of heat causes delirium. The full-blooded person, when the blood is not too hot, is active in body and mind, while the anemic person is sleepy. In one, the ego has better control, in the other, less. When the ego wants to think, it drives blood at the proper heat to the brain. When a heavy meal centres the activity of the ego upon the digestive tracts, the man cannot think, he is sleepy. The old Norsemen and Scots recognised that the ego is in the blood. No stranger could become associated with them as a relative until he had mixed blood with them, and thus become one of them. Goethe, who was an initiate, also showed this in his Faust. Faust is about to sign the compact with Mephistopheles and asks, why not sign with ordinary ink? Why use blood? Mephisto answers, blood is a most peculiar essence. He knows that who has the blood has the man, that without the warm blood no ego can find expression. The proper heat for the real expression of the ego is not present until the mind is born from the macrocosmic concrete mind, when the individual is about 21 years old. Statutory law also recognises this as the earliest age when the man is deemed fit to exercise a franchise. At the present stage of human development, the man goes through these principal stages in each life cycle, from one birth to the next. Well, that concludes chapter 3 of Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception. That was quite a long and in-depth chapter. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for chapter 4.